You know what the absolute worst part about being a Blue Jays fan right now is? Watching the Red Sox lock up Kristian Campbell to an 8-year, $60 million extension and knowing that your team will never have the guts to do something like that. Never. The Red Sox just secured a 22-year-old second baseman for pennies on the dollar, and the Blue Jays are out here trying to trade their entire farm system for 31-year-old veterans who are already on the decline. And people wonder why Boston stays competitive year after year while Toronto spins its wheels. This is why. This is exactly why. The Red Sox think long term. The Blue Jays think next week. Let me paint you a picture of what just happened because I need you to understand how badly the Blue Jays missed on this. Kristian Campbell wasn't even drafted in the first round. He was a fourth-round pick in 2023. The Red Sox got him with a compensation pick they received for losing Xander Bogaerts. So they lost a superstar shortstop and turned that into their next great infielder. Meanwhile, what have the Blue Jays done with their compensation picks? Can you even name them? Because I can't. And that right there tells you everything you need to know about player development and organizational philosophy. The Red Sox find diamonds. The Blue Jays throw money at problems and hope they go away. But here's where it gets really painful. There were rumors, just whispers really, that the Blue Jays could try to pry Campbell away from Boston in a trade. Kristian Campbell, a guy who just signed an extension less than a week into his major league career, a guy who the Red Sox clearly view as untouchable, a guy who represents everything the Blue Jays don't have, which is a coherent plan for the future. And the fact that Toronto would even consider trying to trade for him shows you how desperate they are, how completely out of ideas they are. They see what Boston has, and they want it, but they have no idea how to build it themselves. So they try to buy it, they try to trade for it, and they wonder why it never works. Campbell tore through the minor leagues in 2024. He slashed 330, 439, 558 with a weighted runs created plus of 178. Do you understand how insane those numbers are? That's not just good. That's generational. That's the kind of production that makes scouts salivate. And the Red Sox saw it happening in real time and said, we're not waiting. We're locking this kid up now before he proves he's worth 10 times what we're paying him. That's vision. That's confidence in your scouting department and player development system. The Blue Jays would have waited. They would have let him reach arbitration. They would have nickel and dimed him until he hit free agency and left. That's what they always do. Now let's talk about what happened after Campbell signed that extension, because this is where the story gets complicated and uncomfortable. He started the season on fire. He was hitting .375 with a .500 on-base percentage. He won AL Rookie of the Month for April. Everything was clicking. The Red Sox looked like geniuses, and then reality hit. Hard. Campbell struggled in May and June. His batting average plummeted. His defense, which was already questionable, got worse. -14 defensive runs saved, -8 outs above average. He was one of the worst defenders in the entire major leagues. And on June 19th, the Red Sox sent him down to AAA, one of the top prospects in baseball, a guy they just gave $60 million to, demoted after 2 months. That's brutal. That's embarrassing. That's the kind of thing that makes organizations second-guess everything. But you know what the Red Sox didn't do? They didn't panic. They didn't trade him. They didn't leak anonymous quotes to the media about buyer's remorse. They sent him down to work on his game. They believed in the process. They trusted their initial evaluation, because that's what competent organizations do. They ride out the bumps. They develop players. They don't abandon ship at the first sign of trouble. Meanwhile, if the Blue Jays had made that deal, what do you think would have happened? The fans would have rioted. The media would have crucified the front office. There would be calls to fire everyone, and the Blue Jays would have been looking to cut their losses by August. That's the difference between a franchise that knows what it's doing and one that's just guessing. Here's the really messed up part. Even after Campbell struggled and got sent down, reports started coming out that he could eventually be worth over $200 million. Jeff Passan from ESPN linked him to a future deal in that range. Think about that. A player who's hitting .223 in his rookie season, a player who just got demoted, is still viewed as someone who could get a massive extension down the road. Why? Because the underlying talent is undeniable, because the tools are all there, because one bad stretch doesn't define a career. The Red Sox understood that when they signed him. They knew there would be growing pains. They accepted that. And when those growing pains arrived exactly on schedule, they handled it professionally and kept developing him. That's organizational maturity. That's something the Blue Jays have never had. Now let me address the elephant in the room. Could the Blue Jays actually trade for Kristian Campbell? Technically, yes. The Red Sox are supposedly considering Ketel Marte from the Diamondbacks, and there are whispers that Campbell could be part of the return package going back to Arizona. It wouldn't make sense for Boston to have both Marte and Campbell on long-term deals since they play the same position. So theoretically, Campbell could become available. And if he becomes available, you can bet the Blue Jays will be one of 10 teams making calls. But here's why that would be a disaster. The price, the cost, what Arizona would demand in return for Marte if Campbell is included. Because you're not just giving up Campbell at that point. You're giving up Campbell plus other prospects, plus maybe major league talent. And also you can get Ketel Marte, who is 31 years old and just had a career year that he's unlikely to repeat. That's not smart. That's not building for sustained success. That's mortgaging your future for a guy who might give you 2 good years. Let's say the Blue Jays somehow pull off a miracle and get Campbell without giving up the farm. Let's say they actually make a smart, aggressive move for once in their existence. Do you trust them to develop him properly? Do you trust them to handle the inevitable struggles that come with young players? Do you trust them to not ruin him the way they've ruined so many other prospects over the years? Because I don't. I've watched this organization for too long. I've seen too many talented players come through the system and either stagnate or get traded away before they reach their potential. The Blue Jays don't have a track record of patience. They don't have a history of player development excellence. They have a history of panic and short-term thinking, and Kristian Campbell deserves better than that. The Red Sox development staff rebuilt Campbell's swing when he first got drafted. They identified mechanical issues and fixed them. They more than doubled his home run output from his college days. They turned a 4th-round pick into a top 10 prospect in baseball, and they did it in less than 2 years. Can you name a single Blue Jays prospect that they've developed that dramatically over the past decade? Because I can't. The Blue Jays are great at identifying international talent and signing big-name free agents, but actual player development, actually taking raw tools and turning them into productive major leaguers, that's not their strength. So even if they got Campbell, even if they acquired him somehow, what makes you think they wouldn't waste his potential? Here's what really burns me up about this entire situation. The Red Sox and Blue Jays are supposedly in the same division. They're supposed to be competing against each other. But they operate on completely different timelines with completely different philosophies. Boston is building a sustainable winner. They've locked up Garrett Crochet to a 6-year deal. They've got Rafael Devers signed through 2033, Ceddanne Rafaela through 2031. They have Roman Anthony and Marcelo Mayer waiting in the wings. They're constructing a core that can compete for a decade. Meanwhile, the Blue Jays are scrambling to win next year. They're trading prospects for rentals. They're signing aging veterans. They're acting like their window is closing when they should be building one that stays open for years. That's not a recipe for success. That's a recipe for 3 years of mediocrity followed by a brutal rebuild. And you want to know the really sad part? Even if Campbell never figures it out at the major league level, even if his struggles continue and he washes out, the Red Sox still made the right decision by signing him to that extension, because that's how you attract other young talent. That's how you show prospects that you believe in them. That's how you build a culture of trust and development. Young players see the Red Sox locking up Campbell after 7 games and they think, I want to play there. I want to be part of an organization that invests in its young talent. They see the Blue Jays trading away prospects for quick fixes and they think, I'll get flipped the moment things get tough. Culture matters, reputation matters, and the Red Sox have built a reputation for developing and trusting their homegrown talent. The Blue Jays have built a reputation for impatience and desperation. Let's also talk about the contract itself, because $60 million over 8 years is nothing. That's $7.5 million per year. Do you know what journeyman middle infielders are getting on the open market right now? They're getting $15, $20 million per year. Jorge Polanco just signed for $20 million per year with the Mets, and he's 31 years old. Campbell is 22. The Red Sox are paying half of what they'd have to pay for a veteran with a much shorter window of production. And if Campbell develops into even an average everyday player, that contract is a steal. If he develops into what his scouting reports suggest he can be, it's one of the best deals in baseball. That's the value of betting on young talent. That's what the Blue Jays refuse to understand. But here's where I need to be honest about something. Campbell's struggles in his rookie year are concerning. 223 batting average, 319 on-base percentage, 345 slugging percentage, terrible defense at second base, getting demoted in June. That's not what the Red Sox hoped for when they gave him that extension, and it raises legitimate questions about whether he can make the adjustments necessary to succeed at the highest level. The strikeout rate wasn't terrible in the minors, but major league pitching is different. Major league sliders and changeups are different, and some guys just never figure it out. So there is real risk here, real possibility that this contract ends up being a bust. But you know what? That's the risk you take when you're trying to build something sustainable. You can't hit on every prospect. You can't be right every time, but you have to try. You have to bet on your development system and your scouting, because the alternative is what the Blue Jays are doing, which is giving $40 million to 31-year-old veterans who are already past their prime. There are reports that Campbell is working on his game in winter ball right now. He's trying to get stronger. He's working on his defensive mechanics. He's addressing the issues that caused his demotion, and maybe he figures it out. Maybe next season he comes back and mashes. Maybe he turns into the player everyone thought he would be, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's a career utility guy who never quite lived up to the hype. But at least the Red Sox tried. At least they took a swing. At least they believed in something other than buying the finished product off the shelf. That's more than the Blue Jays can say. Here's my prediction. Kristian Campbell will never wear a Blue Jays uniform. He'll either stay with the Red Sox and develop into a solid contributor, or he'll be part of a trade package that doesn't involve Toronto at all. The Blue Jays will continue chasing veterans. They'll continue overpaying for declining players. They'll continue missing their window because they refuse to build one properly. And in 5 years, when the Red Sox are competing for championships with their homegrown core and the Blue Jays are rebuilding after wasting their competitive window, we'll look back at this moment. We'll look back at Kristian Campbell signing that extension at age 22, and we'll realize that this was the moment the two franchises diverged completely. One committed to building, one committed to buying, and the one that built properly is the one that won. It's always been that way. It always will be. And until the Blue Jays learn that lesson, they'll keep watching teams like Boston do it right while they do it wrong. That's the real tragedy here. Not that they can't get Kristian Campbell, but that they'll never understand why they should have tried to develop someone like him themselves instead of always looking elsewhere for the answer.